Turkey is in no doubt about who's responsible for the failed coup attempt in July. It's pointed the finger squarely at Fethullah Gulen, a reclusive Turkish cleric living in exile in Pennsylvania, who's said to control a global network of businesses, schools and media interests. My guest here in Frankfurt is his movement's chief representative in Germany. Is the whole enterprise as benign as it claims to be, or is there a darker side? Ercan Karakoyun, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's go back to the attempted coup in Turkey in July. Turkey blames Fethullah Gulen and his followers for this. They're right, aren't they? You were responsible for this.
I think they are wrong, because the Hizmet movement is engaged in education and dialogue for 40 years now.
The Hizmet movement is
the so-called Gulen movement.
Yes,
but we
service.
Yes, but we call ourselves Hizmet movement because
I understand.
It is not a cult, so we don't reduce our activities on Mr. Gulen. And I think that the accusations of Erdogan are absurd, because Fethullah Gulen's preachings, you can read them in about 70 books, which consist of 15,000 pages. And he has always been a democratic voice. He has always been someone that focused on human rights.
Okay, but he's not doing a very good job of convincing the international community. Last week, the European Council on Foreign Relations, a very respected think tank, called your movement opaque and secretive and said there is enough evidence linking followers of Gulen to the coup, but evidence pointing to Gulen himself remains scant. So you're not doing a very good job of convincing people in Europe either of your innocence.
I think we have to work on it, because until now nobody was interested in the Hizmet movement.
It's not a question of working on it. You're either guilty or you're innocent.
We are innocent, but I think the problem is that nobody was interested in the work of the Hizmet movement for 40 years now. And now, since Erdogan has defined us as a scapegoat, and under this pretext he is cleaning and purging the whole state, everybody is suddenly interested in the Hizmet movement. So what we need to do...
People have been studying your movement for a long time, and the European Council on Foreign Relations says your movement has infiltrated the state, enabling it to orchestrate conspiracies to get rid of political enemies. So it seems as though they've been studying your movement quite a lot over the years.
I think the accusation of infiltration, it comes from the Kemalists. This is where it is rooted, because the Kemalists saw the state as their own. And nobody who had different thoughts or different beliefs had the possibility to serve for the state. And this is, for example, why Gulen said it is the right of every Turkish citizen, even if he's a believing Muslim, to serve for the state. And
okay, but we're talking this is
not infiltration.
A little more than just serving the state. We have the British ambassador, a government official in Ankara, saying he had no difficulty accepting what the Turkish government was accusing your movement of, namely involvement in the coup. He says circumstantially, without prejudging the judicial process, it looks to me a pretty convincing case. So the people who are studying you, looking at you, close to, in Turkey, are not convinced by your arguments, nor by your professions of innocence.
Well, there are different opinions as well. For example, John Esposito, the famous expert who also analyzed Hizmet for a long time. There are several other German experts, for example. There are experts in the US, in Britain.
Yeah, we're talking about government here. We're talking about a respected government, a permanent member of the Security Council, who's actually saying you're guilty here.
But on the other end, there is, for example, Biden, Kerry, who all say that there is no extradition going to be because there are no evidences. So what Turkey...
But they haven't said that they're going to look at the evidence if Turkey produces it. They haven't said there's no evidence.
But
They've said they will look
at
the evidence if it is provided by Turkey.
But there is no evidence that links
this as well.
But there is no evidence that is linked to the coup. So the Turkish government, it seems to me, has no interest in investigations. This has always been like this for about 10 years.
The European Council on Foreign Relations says there is enough evidence linking followers of Gulen to the coup. You say there isn't any. They say there is.
But there are also, it is a coup, and there are a lot of military personnel.
A coup attempt.
It is a coup attempt, and there are a lot of persons that are involved in such an act.
So you're saying you don't know whether your followers were involved or not? They could have been.
Of course we don't know. There have been.
Okay, so they could have been. So your denials are actually worthless then?
No, there may be AKP people that have been involved. There may have been Kemalists that have been involved. And I think that
people may have been involved in it?
There are a lot of people that can be involved. For example, of course they can be involved, but it has nothing to do...
So your denials are meaningless.
But it has nothing to do with the core values of Hizmet. For example, if a Catholic somewhere in the world commits a crime, it has nothing to do with the Catholic Church or the Pope. So there can always be people that commit crimes. Hizmet is a very heterogeneous movement that consists of maybe 5 million people. Only in Germany we are about 100,000 people. And they all have different opinions, they all have different characters. So you can never say in a social movement that is such broad and heterogeneous that there is nobody committing crimes.
So you might have been, some of your people might have been responsible for this coup attempt. They might have been, yeah?
No, I don't think that they have been responsible.
They could have been responsible.
I think what we need
You're
are
opening up
investigations.
An interesting angle here, saying that some of them might have been. If I understand you correctly, this is not a very emphatic denial on your part.
I think what we need are investigations. And it seems to me as if Erdogan has no interest in investigations, because I don't know why he isn't interested in it, but he can open the evidence to an international organization, for example, that comes and looks at the evidences, but he doesn't. I think he does not have an interest in it, because he defined the scapegoat, and he is purging the state from all critics at the moment.
Well, he's not the only one who's pointing the finger at you. But let's have a look at your track record here, because despite your current emphasis on moderation and tolerance, your movement has in the past supported actions by the Turkish government that were anything but moderate or tolerant. In fact, they were pretty repressive, weren't they? The European Council on Foreign Relations says that between 2008 and 2013, with the help of the Turkish government, the Gulen movement persecuted political enemies in show trials. Dozens of these trials were held. Hundreds of military officers, generals, journalists, writers, bureaucrats were imprisoned with the aid of your movement.
So I don't think so.
So your track record isn't great when it comes to moderation and tolerance, the values that you preach today.
I think you have to read Turkey within Turkey. And if you look to the late 90s, you see that Turkey was a very oligarchic system. It was very authoritarian. And when Erdogan came to power, he promised European values, he promised democracy, he promised a constitutional state.
Answer these charges, because these are pretty damning charges from the European Council on Foreign Relations, that you
I think these have to be investigated.
Persecuted political enemies in show trials. Did you or didn't you?
We didn't. I think this has to be investigated. And then everybody who committed a crime, everybody who is guilty, no matter to which, whether he is Kemalist, Alawi, Kurd, Turk, or whether he is sympathizer of Gulen, everybody who commits a crime has to be investigated, and he has to face the consequences. Everybody who commits a crime has to face investigations and has to be trialed. And the point is that Erdogan is never interested in investigations, so we don't know who was behind all these things that you mentioned.
Well, a lot of people, as I said before, have been investigating your movement. In 2007, the New York Times reported that much of the evidence that had been presented in the trials, the show trials we talked about, which implicate your movement, much of this evidence appeared to have been fabricated.
So this is something you have to ask the politicians. So
no, I'm asking your movement because your movement, according to these reports, was involved in fabricating evidence. In 2010, in the sledgehammer, so-called sledgehammer trial, which led to 300 army officials being jailed for allegedly another coup attempt, your movement acted as cheerleader for these trials, which effectively collapsed because of fabricated evidence. But your movement was cheerleading, championing.
I think that was a big mistake, and I must say that I'm very sad about, for example, the politics of publishing from Zaman Media House, because which is
a Gulen affiliated publishing house.
It is, but maybe you'll have a look at what Gulen said at that time. Gulen was crying when he heard that, for example, generals were in
Crying?
custody.
We didn't hear much in the way of crying.
And he, for example, defended Ahmed Shik, who was imprisoned at that time too. He said nobody should ever get in custody for writing negative things about me. So I think if you look to what some people of the movement did and to what Gulen says, for example, you see the contradiction.
It didn't stop this happening.
This is why I say
that your media, the media that were affiliated to the Gulen group, were supporting these investigations that were based on fabricated evidence.
Everybody who fabricated these evidences has to be investigated. This, I believe, in the independence
but this is part of your
judiciary.
track record, Mr. Karakoyun. We have a story of fabricated evidence, ruined lives, years wasted in jail on false charges, and your movement was partly responsible for this. I don't say wholly, but according to the reports at the time, partly responsible. In 2014, when an Istanbul court ordered the release of 230 people, the Constitutional Court decided that the defendants' rights had been violated. You took part. You have to put up your hand and say, we are also responsible for violating the rights of these people.
Yes, of course. But if you look back, for example, to a lot of articles and books that were published in 2008 and 2009, you see, for example, Can Dündar and a lot of other critical journalists of Erdogan, at that time, they welcomed the Ergenekon and Balyoz investigations because everybody saw it as a step towards democracy. But I think what happened then is that Erdogan misused these trials in order to start a purge. So I think
it wasn't just Erdogan.
So I think that Erdogan is responsible for the fabricating of such.
Your movement was very happy to see
proofs.
Your political enemies jailed, your political enemies discredited and jailed. You were very happy about that.
I don't think so, because, for example, I took the book of Ahmet Şık and put it on my homepage. I was at that time publisher of the German-Turkish newspaper, and I put his book about the Gulen movement that was very critical, and he was in custody. I put his book onto my homepage because it is absurd. Freedom of thought, freedom of press.
This is his book, The Army of the Imam,
yes,
that
and
he
I
wrote,
put this
and which
book
got him
onto
in
my
jail.
homepage.
And he said at the time about your movement, if you touch them, you get burned. Whether you're a journalist, an intellectual, or a human rights activist, if you dare to criticize them, you're accused of being a drug dealer or a terrorist. So he was saying what the price was of writing something about your movement.
And I defended him, just as I said.
But it didn't help. You may have defended him, but your movement was still responsible.
Gulen defended him also. So I think we have to distinguish between.
Well, maybe you don't control your movement anymore, if that's the case. Maybe you don't control them anymore.
Of course, because it is a very broad and heterogeneous movement. There are about maybe 10 million students, pupils that finished Hizmet schools. So it is a very broad, movement, and you cannot control it. It is not the aim of Hizmet to control these people. They are all free. They can do what they want. And to say that everybody who is able to...
This is an easy excuse to make, Mr. Karakoyun.
It is not an excuse.
This is an easy excuse.
No.
You are a tightly controlled movement.
No, it is not.
There are, especially in government circles, where there are imams for the police, imams for the government, imams in particular government departments, which corral your followers and direct them and make sure that they are towing the line.
Well, freedom of thought, freedom of emotions, freedom of press are core values that we stand for. The state of law, the constitutional state, the separation, the separation of powers.
It didn't look like it, did it?
Well, I also say that this book had to be published. This is why I put it on my homepage, because it is absurd. Freedom of press, freedom of thought is a human right, and nobody can work against it. And if somebody does, there have to be investigations and there have to be trials.
So the press that was affiliated with your movement should have been put on trial and investigated as well. The Zaman papers, for instance, should have been investigated.
Of course.
These were your papers that were in thrall to your movement.
If they knew that there were fabricated proofs and they published it by knowing it, then of course they have to be investigated. Everybody, no matter whether he is Gulen sympathizer or not, has to be investigated. such things never have something to do with our core values. So what I say is, it is a human right that every individual himself is guilty for what he commits. You cannot make me responsible for something that his Met followers in Turkey do. So the guilt, the individuality of guilt is a human right. And you have to investigate these people, you have to take them to trial, and then they have to face the consequences. But just as I pointed just before, Erdogan has no interest in these investigations. And I am asking myself why he hasn't this interest. Maybe because he's self behind all these that happened?
Mr. Karakoyun, the European Council on Foreign Relations talks about your group's interest in law enforcement. It calls it almost obsessive, says it sets it apart from all other religious groups in Turkey. And it draws attention to a sermon given in the late 90s by Fethullah Gulen, where he advised his followers to continue living incognito inside the veins of the state until enough power has been amassed. You must move in the veins of the system, he's reported as saying, without anyone noticing your existence until you reach all the power centers. You must wait until such time as you've got all the state power, until you've brought to your side all the power of the constitutional institutions in Turkey. This is a power grab being recommended by Fethullah Gulen, the leader of your movement, isn't it? A slow, gradual infiltration of state institutions to grab power.
Towards democracy.
Towards democracy doesn't look like it, does it?
Yes, it looks like, because you have to consider
towards
what Turkey...
show trials and fabricated evidence. That's what it's been towards.
No, maybe you look into the 90s of Turkey. There was the oligarchic...
And to jail journalists that you were quite happy to have jailed.
There was an oligarchic authoritarian state. And believing Muslims, Armenians, Christians, Kurds had no opportunity to serve for the Turkish state. And when a preacher now says, it is your right as well to serve for your country, entered into the ministries and into all areas of state, it is not infiltration, it is normalization. And if you look into preachings,
normalization,
and if you look into the preachings,
that's an outrageous claim.
No.
Mr.
If you look, for example,
that you infiltrated the state in order to democratize it.
Yes,
that you had no.
That's it, and this is what
and
happened.
Your show trials were to democratize, and
for example, if you
the attacks on people who wrote books about you was also to democratize.
For
this
example,
is an outrageous suggestion.
You have to look who is behind these deeds. I think it is Erdogan, because if you look to what Gulen wrote, for example, in 94, 96, in different interviews with secular journalists, Gulen always said that there has to be a separation between religion and state, and that there has to be a democratic state, and he always said that he has nothing to do with politics.
It's
and I think these are the important things.
Mr. Karakoyun, it doesn't matter what you say or write, it matters what you do. What you were doing in the background.
Yes,
what
and if you look what we did
in these state institutions.
For example, when you look to the first years of Erdogan, when it was so that there were many
good friends with him.
Yes, what happened in these years?
They were good friends.
What happened in these years?
And they worked together to eliminate their political enemies.
No, what happened in these years?
Exactly what
For example, we had minority rights promoting in these years. The Kurds had their right to speak their mother tongue. We had Alevis that were getting their cemevis, their prayer rooms. And we had, for example, a lot of minority rights that were given to the Armenians, to the Christians. These were values that we promoted. But when Erdogan came to power...
At the same time as you were bitterly repressing people from the army, and journalists were being repressed as well.
I think
at the same time.
Erdogan started his purge in these years. And now it looks, because he has found a good scapegoat, a pacifistic education movement whose preacher is living in the Pocono Mountains, who is very spiritual and who lives a very reclusive life. You can't find a better scapegoat. And this is what Erdogan did. He now projects everything on his Met. He even said that the earthquake of '99 was made by Gulen.
I understand. It doesn't make you angels. Even if Mr. Erdogan has done bad things, it doesn't make you angels. In 2012, the New York Times described a culture of fear around your organization. They said it was so endemic that few people in Turkey would talk openly about your group on the phone for fear that their conversations would be monitored and there would be consequences. As far back as 2005, the US consulate in Istanbul sent a cable to Washington marked secret. It was about your group. The cable expressed deep and widespread doubts about your movement's ultimate intentions. Disturbingly, it also spoke about pressure the movement applied to people who you had drawn into your circles. It says, we have anecdotal evidence of the pressure that the various circles of his, that's Gulen's movement, put on people they've drawn in. For instance, severe pressure on businessmen to continue to give money to support Gulenist schools or other activities. Moderation and tolerance you preach, not pressure. The reality is you pressure people to give, you pressure people to toe your line, you pressure people to take the politics of Turkey in the particular direction you want it to go in. That's the reality, isn't it?
I don't think so, because just as I said, Gulen, for example, met late Pope John Paul. He met with the Armenian Patriarch. He met with Bartholomew. He met with Isaac Haleva, the chief rabbi of Jews in Turkey.
So why all the secrecy around your movement? Why all the secrecy? If you're going out and meeting all these people and trying to present a public face, why all the secrecy? No one has managed to reveal the financial and administrative backbone of your organization. That from a professor at Stockholm University's Institute for Turkish Studies.
But this is very transparent, I think, because if you look into the institution's fundings, you will see that they are all funded by regional firms, by regional institutions. They are funded by, for example, in Germany, we are funded by people that live here. So the financials, the aims, and the structures are very transparent. They are, everybody can follow them.
You say that, but everybody points, in fact, to the secrecy and the lack of transparency. And one of the teachers who worked in one of your charter schools, and you have the largest number of charter schools in the United States, said the way your system worked was that a Gulen organization controls the real estate companies that own the schools. They charge rent to their own schools and taxpayers foot the bill. They refuse to answer public record requests, falsify attendance records, and cheat on standardized tests. This is one of the teachers who worked in your organization and saw the methods. A man called Matthew.
Do you know what Gulen said?
Who saw the methods that your movement applied.
Gulen said, if there is any school that does not make transparent and that has such mistakes, then they should be closed.
Well, 33 of them were reprimanded in 2011.
If there are any,
33 were
if there are any mistakes, if there are any problems, any crimes committed by members, by volunteers, by institutions that have a connection with Hizmet, then they should be investigated, they can be closed.
Why don't you investigate
and they should be,
them?
we are all investigating them.
Really?
For example, there are a lot of articles that we are writing that are very self-critical, that we are discussing about these issues, we are discussing about the mistakes that Hizmet made in the past. For example, when Erdogan tried to purge his criticals after Ergenekon, we are all discussing about these. We are also discussing about, for example, people that leave the Hizmet movement and that say that they felt pressure on them. Because these are things that have nothing to do with our core values. People are free. We are focusing on the individual and not on the state and not on the society.
Okay, so
and
if you're so clean and
we're not clean, this is not what I think. There are of course mistakes, and we are self-critical, and we are working on them.
You claim you're self-critical. Why shouldn't Fethullah Gulen go back to Turkey and clear his name in a trial in Turkey? They want him back. Why doesn't he go back? He's done very well in the courts in Turkey over the years. He's proved his innocence many times. And
well, you can ask the same question.
Every court case.
You can ask the same question to Can Dündar. Why doesn't he go back?
No,
because there is no
You
there
don't
is no
answer for
fair
Can
trial.
Dündar. You answer for Fethullah Gulen.
No,
now I'm asking you the question.
There is no fair trial in Turkey. There is no independence of law. There is no independence
Fethullah
of
Gulen
courts.
has had many fair trials and has succeeded in all of them, as far as I can see.
Because he never was guilty. And they had no choice instead.
So were those fair trials or not? Or was he acquitted wrongly?
Well, we never had such a dictatorship such as now.
Is it only a fair trial when you win?
I don't think so. There has to be an international investigation. This is what I believe. And then whether he's guilty or not has to be decided. Because Erdogan puts his personal interests above state, he puts his personal interest above law and above judiciary. And in such a situation, it's a suicide to turn back to Turkey.
There are two faces to your Gulen movement, aren't there? As Danny Roderick, Harvard economist, has said. It should be clear to any objective observer that the Gulen movement goes much beyond the schools, charities and interfaith activities. It also has a dark underbelly engaged in covert activities such as evidence fabrication. Time to admit there are two faces to your organization, aren't there?
I think that Hizmet is a very heterogeneous and broad movement. There are a lot of people that are engaged. And they, of course, can have mistakes, they can commit crime, and they can do such things. But what has to be done is that these people have to be investigated and trialed. And our core values are dialogue, education, and promoting human rights. And this is what we are trying to do. And this is also why we are very self-critical and why we are working on bettering these things. And this is why we promote democracy in Turkey at the moment.
Ercan Karakoyun, thank you very much for being on Conflict Zone.
Thank you.